Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to Raya and Mordechai for broadcasting this shiur. Yesterday, for a couple of reasons, I decided to learn Mishnah Tet, Mishnah 9. However, knowing that we still did not yet learn Mishnah Zayin and Chet 7 and 8. Bezrat Hashem, we will get to them very soon. But I want to point out something beautiful, is that when I learned together with you Mishnah Tet, Mishnah 9, I had not yet learned the Rambam for yesterday. We concluded the entire Rambam on Sunday, and Monday, Daled Tammuz, we started yesterday the Rambam for the 41st cycle, for the 41st time. And yesterday's Rambam was the introduction for the Rambam. Today's Rambam are, in short, all of the mitzvot say, all of the positive mitzvot of the Rambam, of the entire Torah, the 248 mitzvot. Tomorrow's Rambam will be all of the 365 prohibitive mitzvot. And finally, on Thursday, we'll go through, in short, all of the 14 Sfarim and the Halachot. It's probably the longest Rambam of the year. And then, on Friday, on the 5th day of learning Rambam, we actually start the book of Mada, the first 3 chapters of Hilchot Yisodei HaTorah. And so in yesterday's Rambam, it has this Mishnah. The Rambam talks about basically the concept of Pirkei Avot. The idea of how the Torah was passed down from generation to generation from Moshe. He actually goes through all of the 40 generations until Rav Ashi. And he talks about the idea of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his 5 students. So these students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, they played a major role in passing down the Torah. Not only that, the messages that each one left us are very important for our learning the Torah and keeping it lifnim mishurat hadin, beyond the letter of the law. So the obvious question is, it says in the Mishnah, Chamisha Talmidim, 5 students Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had. It's hard to believe that he had 5 students, that he had only 5 students. Especially he was the one who kept the Torah alive for, I believe it says 40 years. So why would it say that he had 5 students? And so, of course, one of the interpretations is that, and this is what we learned yesterday, that he had many more students, but these were the greatest students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. If so then the Mishnah should say a text which would indicate that these were 5 of his top students. Why would it lead us on to say a seeming mistake, which is that he had 5 students? And in general, we don't need to have a number. Any child in pre-1A can count. Rabbi Eliezer ben Harkanus, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel. Who else was there? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, and one more tzaddik was Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't need to tell us that it was 5. So here's a beautiful interpretation from the Rabbi that these students were not just major students, but each one represented one of the 5 foundations and concepts that we have in Yiddishkeit. For example, what do we have as number 5? We have the 5 books of Moshe. Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim. So each one of the 5 tzaddikim that were mentioned in this Mishnah correspond to another Chumash. Rabbi Eliezer ben Harkanus was called Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, the great Rabbi Eliezer. And we know that the book of Bereshit, which talks about Maaseh Bereshit, the creation of the world, is Hagdulah, the greatness. Then we have Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. That's the book of Shemot. It says with Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya that praised is he or she who gave birth to him. And in the book of Shemot, we have the story of the birth of Am Yisrael, just at the time of going out of Mitzrayim. Number 3 is Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. The book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, is called Torat Kohanim. That's why it's called in English Leviticus, because it talks about the Kohanim and the Leviim doing the service in the Mishkan and later on in the Beit HaMikdash. Number 4 is the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, because Hashem counted Am Yisrael. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel was the one, he says, he was the Yerechet. He had fear of sin. In other words, as we explained last week in another Mishnah, he wasn't afraid of the whip. He wasn't afraid of the punishment. He was afraid of the sin itself. He could not fathom doing a sin. What is a sin? What happens to a person when the sin is done? Forget about the punishment that happens afterwards. The sin itself is something which cuts off a person, God forbid, on some level from being connected to Hashem. And so basically, when a person counts, the book of Numbers, when a person counts his days, and he wants his days to be filled with Torah and mitzvot, so he is certain that he will do the right thing. He won't want to miss one mitzvah, and for sure he will not be able to miss. And for sure he will not want to, God forbid, be cut off from being connected to Hashem. And finally, the 5th rabbi is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. He was the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. Rabbi Elazar was like a wellspring that was just going stronger and stronger and never ending. And that is connected to the book of Devarim, because the book of Devarim was said by Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, you see the first 4 books were said by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu obviously was saying it from Hashem, but you see the power of an individual themselves being strengthened and becoming stronger. So I can understand all of the 5 compliments that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would say to his students. We can learn from this how we should become better and to serve Hashem in a way of lifnim mishurat adin, beyond the letter of the law. But what's the point that towards the end of the Mishnah says, if all of the sages of Am Yisrael would be on one side of the scale, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus was such a great tzaddik, he would be on the other side of the scale. He would weigh them out. And then he goes on, and he says, if all of the sages, including Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, would be on one side of the scale, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach would be on the other side, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach would weigh down the scale. What's the point of doing that? Basically, is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai putting down his other students? Or making jealousy over here? The Mishnah doesn't just talk. The Mishnah doesn't just share information just for whatever. There's a reason why the Mishnah quotes every single detail. So why would we say this point? And the answer is that according to the din, according to the regular sequence of things, every person has to make an effort and to utilize their talents as it's supposed to be. But when we talk about midat Chassidut, we talk about lifnim mishurat adin, beyond the letter of the law. That's not enough. We have to use our talents in the maximum way, to the extent that we will almost, quote unquote, beat out everyone, weigh out everyone. The best way to explain this is the sermon that we mentioned this past Shabbos. I'll give it to you in just a nutshell. We talked about why did we call the name of a parsha with the name of a Rasha, Korach. You shouldn't call a name of an entire portion in the Torah with the name of an individual who was a terrible example for Am Yisroel for generations to come till today and was swallowed up in the ground together with his family. So why would we call the name of Parsha in the Torah with such a name of such a person? And the answer is because there is something that we can learn from him. He wanted it. He was jealous of Moshe Rabbeinu. Usually jealousy has a negative connotation because jealousy usually brings out negative atmosphere. It brings fights between people, between nations, between professionals. He's better than me. I want to be between children in a class. I wish I would get 100 too. Why did I only get 95? Or whatever. Now, Korach said to Moshe, I also want to be the Kohen Gadol. Why did you choose your brother to be the Kohen Gadol? So obviously, the way he did it was terrible, and he brought machloket. But if we're able to zoom in just on one little point, on his desire, he desired to be part of to be on a higher level. Kosher jealousy which can be positive, which can bring to personal growth. When you look at someone, you say, wow, this person was very successful. I also want to be successful like that person. That kind of jealousy doesn't have to be negative. That kind of jealousy can be a positive level of jealousy. It can lift up your level of expectations, and it can bring out the best within you. And that's Lefnim Mishurat Adin in our Mishna. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wants to cause us to be higher, to weigh down the scale, to be more successful. And if one opinion is that Rabbi Eliezer ben Harkanus was the greatest, so then the other opinion is that even if Rabbi Eliezer ben Harkanus was with all the other ones, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Aruch was on the other side of the scale, he weighed out everyone. So there's always one step better than the next, higher and higher. That's something which is very, very powerful. And it can give us a lot of koach, a lot of energy to do our maximum. Not to say, oh, I did what I could and I can go to sleep. No. If the issue has not been accomplished yet, we don't go to sleep until it's done. We turn over the world. We make sure that whatever job needs to be accomplished, we do it until it's accomplished, until it's done. Now let's look at a couple of the compliments that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai gave. We'll just touch on two of them right now. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, he's number 2. And Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, he's number 4. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said about Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, what is his compliment? Ashrei Yoladato. Praised is who gave birth to him. In other words, Rabbeinu Yonah explains he was a Rishon. Rabbeinu Yonah, a great tzaddik, and he explains in this Mishnah that Rabbi Yeshua was blessed with the best midot. He was great in wisdom. He was a super mensch. And that's why it says Ashrei, praised. Praised is someone, we say that when with someone who has super extraordinary midot. If so, the first question the Rabbi asks is, it should say, Ashrav, praise is he. Why do we say that those that gave birth to him are praiseworthy? Especially that we're almost like telling him, the good things that you have are not really yours, not really thanks to you. It's thanks to your mom. But you're not that. You're like, by the way, it happens to be that you fit in the shoes of your mom's child. Why would we do that? Why not give him a compliment which is which is connected to him. Why do we say the person that gave birth? It should have just said your parents should be happy with you. Like there's a verse. And so Rabbi Ovadia Bar Tanura explains, Asher Yolatato, like we said yesterday, that his mother gave birth to him in the yeshiva, and he lived his entire life, even as a baby, even in the time before she gave birth to him, that he heard Torah learning from the greatest tzaddikim in the generation. So this is the way that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai expresses his, Rabbi Yeshua's greatness. Because the moment that his mother gave birth to him, and even before then, he, Rabbi Yeshua, heard Torah all the time. So you, Rabbi Yeshua, are so lucky, are so great. That's why it says Yoladito. Not just that she gave birth to him, but from the moment that you were born, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is emphasizing how special he is, how special Rabbi Yeshua is. The moment that you, Rabbi Yeshua, were born, even before you began to learn Torah and understand the Torah, you internalized like a sponge the words of Torah. And that is one of the greatest foundations of chinuch, of education. When we talk about education, it's not just the knowledge. It's also the atmosphere, the around, the excitement. It's like the example which is told that you can have two families. One family, it's a little bit of a strong example, but I'm going to say it anyways. Two families that have a Shabbat meal. It's just an example. One, and both of the parents of both families, they say you got to learn Torah. Tell children you got to learn Torah. Maybe they'll do their homework with them. But at the Shabbat meal, is there an atmosphere like in one family where there's the children say what they learned in the school, and when we talk about a certain rabbi or a certain tzaddik, then all of a sudden the father pipes up and says, wow, what a great tzaddik, a special man? Or another family where they don't stop talking about this person or that rabbi and why that guy is wrong and this person should have done different. You could talk for 100 years about how important it is to learn Torah. But if you show a bad example about talking negatively about other people, especially tzaddikim, especially rabbis, because you think that you're more important than them, that's called the atmosphere of learning Torah. Every time a rabbi, a tzaddik, is mentioned, and you teach your children, wow, what a great tzaddik. This tzaddik is special in this field. There's another tzaddik, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Arizal, and the great tzaddikim, and you tell them stories about tzaddikim. The child is going to grow up with the atmosphere, with the greatness of learning Torah. You see that this tzaddik and that tzaddik, they learn Torah all day, and they delved in learning Torah, and they worked very hard at it. That is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is in the message that he's giving us. That the children should learn Torah, and they should mainly get the message of how precious the Torah is. And then finally, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, he was Yerei Chet. As we said earlier, it's not that he was afraid of the actual punishment. He was afraid of the sin. What does that mean? That just like we're going to learn later of one mitzvah, and the punishment of a sin is the sin itself. So at first glance, it's hard to understand this, because usually we say the outcome of one action is something else. So we do something good, you get something good for it. You get a pat on the back, you get a candy, you get a treat, you get a car, you get something, a gift. But not that the action itself is the gift. And by the negative sense, it's not that the punishment, one would think, is that the sin is the punishment. And this is what the Mishna, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, is saying. Yes, one does not need to say no, as they say in Hebrew. If a person does this, they'll go to Gehenna, they'll go to hell. That's not that's not the. It could be it's true, but it could be. We don't know what Hashem punishes for each thing. There's no question that there is the concept of sin. We don't know which punishment is for which sin, but that's not the real deeper message of punishment, of sin. The deeper message of punishment is the sin itself. The fact itself, what happens by a mitzvah, we do a mitzvah that connects us to Hashem. Like the Hebrew and Aramaic word tzavta. Mitzvah is like tzavta, connection. But then you have the sin, the avirah. That itself is, God forbid, disconnecting a person from Hashem. That's the worst thing in the world. Don't need to give a person a different punishment for being. It's almost like saying, God forbid. But if a child does something wrong, but they hurt themselves, and so they realized, well, God forbid, that they did something wrong. You don't have to scream at them and say, what did you do? How did you do it? Look, your finger is bleeding. God forbid, or whatever. He knows his finger is bleeding. He got the message quite clearly on his own. He's probably not going to touch the knife ever again, at least as a young child without permission. So sometimes the sin itself is the punishment. And that's a very deep level. And Rabbi Shimon Netanel, he personified this concept. He understood, he valued the preciousness of every single mitzvah and the disadvantage of committing an avera. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was wonderful today, as always, to learn with you. I look forward to meeting you in person, Bezrat Hashem, tonight at 7:30 for a special class, part 2 of Tanya, the letters of the Alter Rebbe, chapter 27. Please bring your Tanya with you, and Bezrat Hashem will also have copies. And so it will also be broadcast, Bezrat Hashem, either live or be posted afterwards. But please make an effort to come and to be part of the shiur in person. We're trying very hard to build up the shiurim, especially the Beit Midrash in the morning that's starting in about 20 minutes. And so, of course, we look forward to seeing you. And Bezrat Hashem tomorrow morning at 9:15. See you then. Bye-bye.